Okay, here's another example where we have our chiral center. Right. First thing, identify the 4 atoms directly attached: bromine, hydrogen, carbon, and carbon. Right, so kind of like the last example, it's pretty easy to say bromine's priority 1, hydrogen's priority 4, but the 2 carbons, you can't differentiate them. So what we're going to do is, just like before, look at what's attached. Well, this carbon here, it's attached to the chiral center, which we're not going to count, but it's also attached to a carbon, a hydrogen, and a hydrogen. So let's write those down. Okay, now let's compare that to this carbon. It's attached to a carbon, a hydrogen, and a hydrogen. Well, guess what? We have a tie. So if you run into a tie, just move one step down the chain and do another comparison. So now what I'm going to do is move to this carbon and this carbon to compare. So let's see what is attached to each of these. Right? Well, we have the attachment that leads back to the chiral center that we're not going to count, but this carbon's attached to a carbon, a hydrogen, a hydrogen. Okay, on the other side, we have the attachment back to the chiral center that we're not going to count, but then this is attached to a carbon, a hydrogen, and a hydrogen. Well, we have another tie. If that's the case, move one step further down the chain and compare. So we'll move to here and here. And let's once again write what's attached. On this one, you have a carbon, a hydrogen, and a hydrogen. On this one on the right, we have a carbon, and a hydrogen. We finally have a tiebreaker. And on the left side, there's 1 carbon. On the right side, there's 2 carbons. Two carbons beat 1. Even though they have the same atomic number, 2 are better than 1. So for that reason, this right side gets the priority 2 designation, and the left side priority 3. So this example shows where you have to be careful, because if you weren't careful, you may have just looked at this and said, oh, well, I have an OH over here, so that must be a higher priority. But in fact, using our rules very carefully and very systematically, it was this right side that got priority over this side with the OH. And that's because we reached the tiebreaker before we ever got to the OH to even consider it. So just look very blindly and carefully down your chain stepwise. Alright, so this one you're pretty much set up because the hydrogen is back and that's where you want it. So now all we need to do is draw our curved arrow, and we go from 1 to 2 to 3. That one is going around to the right. So this is our configuration.